Hello and welcome, everybody. I am so excited that you're here on this channel celebrating with us Arson 10-year anniversary. That's right, it's crazy to think, but 10 years ago, Arson was released and it was the first book of the Arson saga. And I am just so stoked to be sharing this momentous occasion with everybody. All the fans who have stuck with me over the last 10 years, thank you. And to anybody who's new checking out the channel or checking out my work, I'm so stoked that you're here. I hope you love it. We're going to be doing something really cool between April 17th and May 4th, which was the original release date of Arson in 2010. So between April 17th and May 4th, I'm going to be reading 2 chapters every single day. So be sure to come back, check the channel, check all the social pages that I have. Author Estevan Vega is on Facebook and Instagram, Estevan Vega. Also Instagram and Facebook, Capulet ENT, because that's my publishing imprint now. So I'm just really excited to be doing this. This is something I've never done, so bear with me. I'm going to leave it all raw and unedited. So if I make a mistake, you're just going to have to forgive me. Even though I wrote it, it's possible that I could trip over some words now and then. But it's going to be awesome. And like I said, every single day, we're going to be releasing 2 chapters. There's 36 chapters total. So over the next 18 days, we're going to be releasing that. I'm actually going to be reading from the original version, which is this bad boy right here, the OG, cover design by Tyler Evans. He's the man. Shout out to him. Without further ado, let's begin. This is Arson, book 1 of the Arson saga. And it's dedicated to my father. It says, "For my father, a small spark that lit the great fire." Arson by Estevan Vega. 1. The lake was quiet. A lazy fog hovered over the surface of the gray water, whispering in the wake of currents and steady ripples. The world seemed dead to Arson Gable. Silent anyway, like the calm before a storm. It waited. Arson stepped off the porch onto the lawn. His mind was swimming. This was where he came most mornings while Grandma slept. He cut his gaze toward the lake, that black womb, which rested beyond and beneath the rickety dock. It was as if the lake knew his name and his heartbeats, much like the streets and corners of this town knew his name, cold and faceless as they were. Whether he wanted to admit it or not, this place was home, and there was no going back. A bright light burned in the sky, somewhere far enough for him to notice, but close enough to nearly blind him. He breathed deeply and blinked, welcoming the dark rush of black behind his eyelids. From where he stood, he could see the towering oaks rooted deep in the ground. Their thick branches stretched upward into the clouds, some parts draping over the shady spots of the worn-out cabin. One final glance, and he was reminded that these tortuous, beaten things seemed to swallow the world. Just thinking about them, how he'd watched them ruin, made him seem small, so worthless. Arson made a fist and felt the heat swell in his grip. He wanted to run into the brush, to get lost deep in the small section of backwoods Grandma had forced him to avoid ever since they'd moved here. But he didn't move. This town seemed so close-knit and yet so separated. Less than a mile up the road were a country market, restaurants, and a bowling alley. There was even a liquor store, a cheap pharmacy, and some fast food chains. And a few miles past that, a movie theater and a nightclub. But at the heart of this place was disunity, a fierce and futile fight to be known and accepted. Arson never understood why Grandpa had picked here to have the cabin built right beside the lake. Arson slowly approached the dock. His mind returned to thoughts of Danny, the only childhood friend he'd ever had. Dim mornings somehow made each memory more real, hard to let go, and even harder to erase. Was he always here, always watching? Odd how 7 years could come and go without warning, as if the world blinked and somehow forgot to open its eyes again. In all fairness, it had never been his grandparents' intention to stay anywhere for too long, but it seemed East Hampton, Connecticut had become a part of them now, a part of him. "One day we'll be like the rest of them," he recalled Grandpa saying, a man of ideals, empty dreams, and hopes Arson could never freely call his own. Eventually they had grown tired of running. This dull corner of the world seemed ordinary enough for them to believe starting over again as normal folks would be possible. Forget what happened all those years ago in Cambridge, Grandma said so many times that Arson imagined her screaming it to him while he slept. But it was always there, the memory, a splinter in the back of his mind. No going back, ever. Arson staggered across the dock, images of child play and stupid laughter pouring in all at once. Danny's face stuck out the most, and behind that he glimpsed their old home in Cambridge and flashes of his first birthday. His mother wasn't there, though, nor dear old Dad. But that day had been recounted to him only once by his grandfather, and it stuck. Nevertheless, with every joyous memory, distilled regret was close behind. He sometimes imagined what it might be like to get thrown in jail by some nameless special agent and be forgotten, or to wake up and find strong hands squeezing the life out of him. Arson was an unusual boy, a freak. He knew it, and he hated it. Whatever lingered inside his bones always left as quickly as it came, breathing out in short moments of fear or rage. Over the years, he'd asked to be examined to locate the source of his imperfection, and if possible, terminate it. After all, why did he sometimes wake up in the middle of the night with a fever? How come his sweat sizzled when it hit the ground? What was he? Grandma always argued there wasn't much point in talking to no-good doctors or even finding out answers to questions he was better off not asking in the first place. Some people were just born with demons, she'd say. Arson swallowed hard and threw a stone into the water. The splash shattered his reflection, and ripples spread across the dark surface. He wondered why he was the way he was, wondered why those little girls' parents quit looking all of a sudden, why the investigation against two stupid boys evaporated. Perhaps they didn't care about retribution, or maybe they were just sick of chasing shadows. I want to be free, Arson thought, nausea creeping up into his gut. While boats raced along the surface of the lake, Arson stared in awe. They vanished so easily, like mist gliding across the water and dissolving into nothingness. What if men could do the same? There was a man once, he'd heard, who walked upon water and didn't sink. Maybe he could too. Maybe one day there would be those who believed in him. Arson's gaze moved over the lake, across to the other side where Mandy Kimball lived, and her neighbor, his science teacher from the 9th grade. Then his eyes drew back to the ripples spread out before him, to the dying cabin behind him as he spit. Beads of sweat streamed down his bony frame, his ash-brown hair trapped inside the gritty creases of his forehead. Arson listened for the lake's soothing melody, but couldn't hear it. He focused instead on the sound his feet made atop the splintering dock, kind of like the way swings sounded in cheap horror flicks. Empty, rocking back and forth to no melody at all. Closer to the edge he came, lingering. With shut eyes, he stepped out onto the water and began to sink. Peace soon abandoned him to the lake's shallow world. In a blink, he was looking through the eyes of a 10-year-old boy. I don't like fire, he heard the boy say, so frightened, so naive. It's dangerous. Oh, don't be such a wimp, came his older friend's taunts. Just light it already. With each shove and curse, the memory turned alive. It was as if it knew he was watching and didn't like it. The pain still stung, images wilting and dying, only to come alive again and again. I hate fire! Arson could feel the cold, could even remember the way everything sounded, or how there was no sound at all, until the night shattered. The weight of remembering dragged him down while he sucked in a filthy drag of water, his coffined body jerking. The veins on his head began to swell. He was choking. Time to return to the real world, to release the nightmare once more into the dark of the lake. The struggle eventually pulled him to the surface. Slinging his head back and forth, Arson fought to bring himself out of the bitter current, eventually falling upon dead grass. He tasted the grit of sandy dirt in his teeth. Panting, Arson stood up slowly and staggered toward the cabin, where Grandma Kay's shadow guided him in. There was something strange that came over Grandma when she exacted punishment, like a part of her enjoyed it too much. She said fixing their leaky roof was a good and righteous way of killing the demons inside him. Nothing like hard work. She said there was no way a lake could cleanse a boy's troubled mind anyway, and that he was just plain stupid for thinking it could. To ease his frustration, Arson let himself believe that if he had been caught any other day, her scorn might have resulted in something worse than fixing a leaky roof, which Arson would have had to do eventually anyway. Grandma's reasons for why she did things, why she treated him a certain way, seemed to get worse with time. It was no secret that she loathed the idea of him diving into the lake, especially if fully clothed. She even claimed there were toxins in the water from pollution that had supposedly killed a bunch of fish years back. But maybe it was a fair trade. He'd returned to the lake all the toxins he'd soaked up with every vile thought. When considered, Grandma's logic didn't seem all that twisted. She probably just didn't want him bringing any of that evil back with him, infected or not. She was superstitious, so Arson made a promise he knew he couldn't keep, and said it wouldn't happen again. The muggy June morning caused his palms to sweat. Arson almost lost his grip on the bucket during the climb to the top, but regained his balance before losing any supplies. Spider-Man would have been proud. Reading comic books all his life came in handy now and then. Grandpa took care of the cabin to the best of his ability and had even showed Arson how to repair the roof years back. "If you want something done right, you gotta do it yourself," he recalled. But in spite of his grandfather's hard work, it was clear that time eventually wore away all things, even hope. Arson worked for about an hour before carelessness got the best of him. A loose, jagged shingle sliced through the palm of his hand. Blood gushed from the wound and onto his leg. He swore as the sting began to overwhelm him. He chucked the hammer and tried to keep pressure on the cut. "What happened?" Grandma's voice echoed from below. "I heard you cussing all the way in the kitchen. You know how I feel about that." "Sorry, Grandma." Arson was glad she left it at that. Sitting on the roof, he turned slightly toward the sun. "It's a gusher," he thought. Then, as he stared in amazement, he watched the wound cauterize itself in seconds. It burned. "Arson, are you all right up there?" He looked down at the remaining scar, struggling to make sense of it, neglecting the mess on his clothes. "Just fine, Grandma," he called down. "That roof isn't going to fix itself. If I have to spend another night with drops of water hitting my face, I promise you'll regret it." "All right," Arson said. "I'll get back to work." By evening, the task was complete. He braced himself and watched the sunset from the rooftop as it melted against the fluorescent sky. Arson listened as Grandma concluded her tea conversation with the man she loved. Moments later, their time together ended with laughter, and he knew it was safe to come down. Arson caught her while she was clearing away the silverware and china. "Did you finish the roof, love?" she asked in a pleasant voice. "Yes, Grandma, it's healed. I mean fixed." "Marvelous. Say, what you mean, healed?" Arson grabbed the ladder. "I'm really tired. I'm not thinking straight right now. Maybe I just need some rest." "I think you're right. You know, you're not making any sense at all. Say, do you want a piece of cake before I put it away? Grandpa didn't eat much tonight. He's never been much for carrot cake." "No thanks. Not hungry," he said. "Suit yourself. Put your tools away and get on up to bed then. A growing boy like you needs his rest. I hope you learned your lesson, though. I don't like you spending so much time in that miserable lake. The very idea doesn't sit well with my soul." Arson nodded with reluctant eyes and put away the ladder and the tools. Then he rushed inside the cabin and up to his room to read a comic book before dozing off. Maybe tonight his dreams would be different. 2. It was 3 in the afternoon when Mandy walked into the ice cream parlor where Arson worked. He felt so unprepared that he found himself wishing something else came out. Anything other than a surprised, "Hello, how are you?" Mandy was beautiful, beyond beautiful. A few years ago, he had let himself believe she was an angel. As far back as he could remember, there had been 2 types of girls. Girls like Mandy Kimball, and the rest. During the school year, he avoided encounters with girls like her, that whole crowd, because fitting in always seemed like a challenge, an unavoidable one. Besides, the school hallways and lunch tables mandated that conversation with losers like him was the closest thing to social suicide. But for some reason, a reason he couldn't even begin to fathom, Mandy risked her popularity on occasion and chose to notice him. "That's the biggest ice cream cone I've ever seen," she said, eyes glowing. "Sorry, I always do that," he said, blinking about 1,000 times. "Do what?" Give pretty girls too much?" Arson replied, putting his antics on the line in hopes that Venus might actually find him in some way amusing. But in his white and black uniform, covered from nose to neck in a dozen different flavors of Toby's sinfully sweet ice cream, he knew it was empty hope. He held his eyes low, hair curling against his forehead. Then he smiled, feeling like an idiot. "You get paid to serve us ice cream, loser, not flirt with customers," Mandy's friend said. Eye games followed while Arson took the cone back. "Stupid me. Forgot the chocolate shots." Mandy sighed under her breath. "Here you go." Reaching over the counter, she handed him a $5 bill. "Don't even worry about it," Arson said. "We're allowed to give away one free cone a day. Compliments of the house. Or maybe lair would be more appropriate. Always feel awkward telling people this has any resemblance to a home when it has Toby's sinfully sweet ice cream plastered across the front of the building with big red horns. Either way, consider it a gift." The friend, whom he'd later remember as Kim from third period biology, piped up again, snapping her fingers. Excuse me, loser! Does it look like we care?" Arson handed Mandy the cone again. Luckily, she and her friend were the last customers of the night. He didn't dare get into it with Mandy's friend, even though he wanted to tell her to just shut up and take the free cone. He followed their shadows out the door with interest, focusing on Mandy's. What does a guy have to do to get a girl like that? He thought. Moments later, Arson flipped a switch on the wall, and the closed sign illuminated the front window. "Thanks, Arson. That was real nice," he mumbled to himself, imitating Mandy's voice. "I really like you." His shoulders sank. Saying it to yourself doesn't make it true, only pathetic. He locked the door, put his face to the glass, and tried to get a better look at the girls as they walked, but he was too late. Feeling misplaced, another sigh blew out of him. He didn't fit into this world. Nights like these made him wonder if he was simply a manufactured piece of hardware, a mistake in the assembly line of humanity. He felt unique, but in a horrible way. Arson suddenly started coughing. A sharp pain cut through him. It was the same sensation that had found him on the rooftop. Worse. Sweat dripped from the center of his palms, and they quickly got hotter. Arson raced to the sink, where scoopers sank to the bottom, the colorful, assorted residue of a day's worth of ice cream rising to the milky top. Without even thinking, he submerged his hands in the cool water, and the pain went away. Kay prepared herself for bed, always treasuring the short, fleeting moments at night with her husband. She cleaned during the day, doing dishes, mopping floors, washing laundry, necessary qualities of all strong women. Tasks lost on today's generation. For women, there was no room for something as selfish as a career, but child raising, pride, and tradition, on the other hand, were what made a woman valuable. Respectable men were supposed to work and provide for their wives, lead. Everybody had their place. It was the way it had always been. Before bed, Kay often stared into the vanity mirror for a while, gazing into the eyes that had grown so cold over the years. "I'm old," she said, letting her hair down. The gray static strands zigzagged past her shoulders and across her breasts. A naked woman in her mirror groaned. Kay looked down and caressed the fatty parts of her skin. The saggy, undesirable folds infuriated her. She didn't want them. Who would? It had been years since she'd felt beautiful. She longed for the days of her youth. Simpler times. She remembered when she first began to blossom, confident with the blessing of puberty and inviting curves. Kay soon learned that the key to a man's heart rested not in his desire for good cooking, like her mother used to tell her, but through his eyes. Men wanted beautiful women, and youthful beauty for her had been easy to lend. From early on, Kay had watched men's expressions melt when she walked into a room. She took their kisses and gifts as quickly as they came, but it was never enough. Deep down, she wanted romance, marriage, and children. After years of empty interests, her wish had come true. The year was 1969, and Kay was not yet 24. The world was full, free, and reveling. The war and rebellion seemed mere trifles when compared to lonely hearts. It was easy to get lost in a city transported by its bright lights and sounds. Cambridge was a city that lit up at night. The way she lit up, the second Henry Parker stumbled into a downtown pub, looking for a drink to calm an unsettled mind. A radiant red dress hung off her silky shoulders. Kay's eyes were sparkling jewels. She was exquisite even in memory. The man she'd come to call darling stood yards away when their eyes met for the first time. Slowly he walked toward her and spoke. "Pleasure to meet you," he said. "I'm Henry. Where have you been all my life?" A pathetic first line, but she could tell he was trying. Kay had known men before, talked and danced with them, but this stranger's boyish smile showed a calm unlike anything he had ever seen. She had believed herself to be unattainable, incorruptible, until that night. Fluttered heartbeats soon led to long walks and midnight dancing. In time, she fell in love. Kay knew that Henry Parker held the key to the future she'd always wanted. But in a blink, it was gone. Kay hated the old shell she now wore, the one that wrapped around her like a coffin. Wrinkles and sagging flesh now corrupted her once flawless cheeks and inviting shape. She was unfit for romance. There was no room for beauty. Passion had fled, and the distant sound of youth called out to her from within the mirror. "You're old, Kay," it taunted. "You're old." She began to cry as the young woman continued the ridicule. "A real woman is beautiful. A real woman knows how to love. You're not a real woman, Kay. Not anymore." "Leave me alone!" Kay screamed back, reaching for a pair of shears and placing them to her stomach. "Get out, or I'll cut you out." "Henry wouldn't allow it," her reflection answered. "Deep down, he still wants me." Kay's tired eyes lingered as she watched young Kay lie upon the bed, gently sliding into Henry's arms. Her Henry. She watched the image press her lips against his mouth as Kay shouted, "Stop! That's enough!" Young Kay glared back from the bed within the mirror, as if reaching through time. An unrelenting stare passed through the portals of then and now, with no way to go back or forward. Kay fell to her knees, grabbed her face, and wept. She smacked herself twice until blood began to flow. The vindictive critic inside the mirror evaporated. Quietly, Kay got up, slipped her bathrobe on, and shut off the lights. With soaked eyes, she crawled into bed. "Good night, my darling," she cried. All right, guys, that's the end of chapter 2. Like I said, every single day we're going to be releasing a new video. So please be sure to like it, share it, tell your friends about it. It's great for if you're riding in the car and you just need something to listen to on your way to the grocery store, or it's cool if you're just chilling at home and you need something to do. You can follow along with the book, or if you have it on the Kindle or the Nook or whatever, that works too. Or you can just listen to it while you sleep. Maybe it'll give you some cool nightmares or something. But thank you so much for tuning in. And please come back tomorrow. We'll be doing chapters 3 and 4. All right. Stay safe. God bless.